Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar about tunnelling on Phase 2B. My name is Jonathan, and I'm an engagement executive for HS2. We'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us today. As you will understand, we are unable to hold large information events at the moment due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we hope this webinar will help keep you informed about the design refinement consultation and updates for your area, and give you an opportunity to ask general questions which you may have. During the webinar, you will hear from one of our engagement managers. Before we move into a question and answer session, where we will be joined by a team of specialists who will answer as many questions as time permits. Please note that we will only be able to answer general questions. Any questions relating to your individual circumstances should be raised via our help desk, who will be able to provide you with specific advice for your needs. If we get a lot of questions come in around the same topic, we may group these together and answer as one to avoid repeating answers. And if we do run out of time to answer questions and you feel you have not had your question answered, again, we would ask that you contact our help desk. If we get a lot of questions come in around the same topic, we may group these together and answer as one to avoid repeating ourselves. And this, again, will help save time. Before I hand over to my colleague John, I wanted to share some technical information. All lines are muted, so you don't have to worry about any background noise. We don't anticipate any technical issues during our event today. However, we want to provide some basic advice should you experience any connection issues. If your feed freezes, wait for about 10 seconds as it will most likely correct itself. If this doesn't happen, use the leave button to exit the call and rejoin using the event link. You will be able to use the toggle at the bottom of your screen to rewind back to where you left the call. You can also use this functionality at any point during the call, should you need to pause for any reason. If there is a freeze or you disconnect and you are unable to rejoin due to a wider Microsoft incident, we will email you with further information. A recording of this live event will also be published on our HS2 YouTube channel after the event. Therefore, if all else fails, you will be able to replay the live event in your own time. There is a Q&A and comment function, which you should be able to find at the top right-hand side of your screen. My colleague Helen will be keeping an eye on the questions that come through as we go, and then at the end of the session today, she will ask the team here to answer as many as we have time to get through. Please note that we will only answer general questions, and any questions relating to your individual circumstances should be raised via our help desk. If we get a lot of questions come in around the same topic, we may also group these together and answer as one to avoid repeating answers. If you have previously attended one of our local information events or drop-ins, you may be familiar with our next speaker, who will talk you through the purpose of today's session. John, over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hello, everyone. I'm John. I'm an engagement manager with HS2. Just before we talk about tunnelling, a few comments, if you will, on connectivity. And at HS2 today, we feel that Britain is less an island of opportunity than it could be. Too many people struggle to find work that they can easily get home from, and businesses can struggle to find the right employees, services and markets they need to grow. HS2 will transform the way we think about travelling around Britain. With faster journeys, distances shrink, making it easier to move around for work or leisure and bringing businesses, families and friends closer together. Speed is not the objective, it is saving time that matters, and HS2 trains will be fast with a maximum operating speed of over 220 miles per hour. But if you cut journey times between places, it encourages people and businesses to seek new opportunities. It will help make Britain more productive, helping businesses reach new clients and hire new people. It will provide people with more opportunities within reach to live, work, study or holiday in different places. So today we're going to be looking at tunnelling, and the webinar will show you where the tunnelling is taking place on the Phase 2B Western Leg. We're going to look at how we intend to construct the tunnels, including how we're going to dispose of the excavated material. We'll describe the ventilation shafts which appear above ground along the line of the tunnels, what they're for and what they might look like. And we will talk about how the tunnels might affect you and your property before closing down with a few comments about where the scheme goes from here. So the tunnel in Manchester is the longer of the two tunnels on the western leg at 12.8 kilometres, and that's about 8 miles. There'll actually be 2 separate bores, one for each direction, and each of those will be about 7.6 metres in diameter, about 26 feet. There will be 4 ventilation shafts, and there will be porous portals at either end, which we're going to talk about later. So the trains will be slowing down as they approach Manchester Piccadilly, and the design speed of the tunnel is 230 kilometres an hour. The tunnel begins at its southern end, just after trains have left the proposed HS2 Manchester Airport station heading towards Manchester, and it emerges just before Piccadilly Station in Ardwick. The Crewe tunnel is about half the length of the Manchester tunnel with 2 ventilation shafts. The trains using the tunnels will be travelling at high speeds here, and the design speed allows for 360 kilometres per hour with tunnel diameters of 8.8 metres. That's about 29 feet. So the Crewe tunnel marks the starting point of phase 2B on the western leg and begins just south of Casey Lane in Hough. And it passes underneath the town of Crewe, although tracks will be built above surface too, to allow some HS2 trains to stop there. The tunnel emerges in Cutting alongside the West Coast Main Line near Broughton Road. So specially commissioned tunnel boring machines, which we'll refer to as TBMs, will dig out the tunnels, and they're tailored with state-of-the-art technology to cope with the specific geology in their area and to minimise construction risk and ground movements. In Crewe, the TBM will start at the northern end of the tunnel between the existing West Coast Main Line and Broughton Road, and it will work its way south underneath the town. The earth which it digs out will be taken on a specially built conveyor belt further north to the site later to be used for the rolling stock depot at Wimblesley, where it will be stored for future reuse or removal. The conveyor belt will be enclosed to limit noise. In Manchester, digging starts from both ends of the tunnel, and material dug out at the Piccadilly end will be moved away on freight trains from sidings in Ardwick. At the Manchester Airport station, excavated material will be moved off-site by road via the M56 Junction 7. Now, I mentioned porous portals previously, and that these are constructed at the entry or exit sections of a tunnel. The portals have multiple small openings in the roof or walls of the structure to control noise and air pressure, and they act to dissipate the pressure wave which is created when the train goes in and out of the tunnel, and it muffling the noise of the train at this point. So, as you said before, each tunnel will have a number of ventilation shafts. So there'll be 2 ventilation shafts on the Crewe tunnel. One will be at Cowley Way, just south of Crewe Station, and the other just off Middlewich Street to the north. And in Manchester, the tunnel has 4 shafts at Altrincham Road, Palatine Road, Wilmslow Road and Birchfields Road. So the shafts are placed along the line of the tunnel about 2 to 3 kilometres apart. And as you can see from this drawing, they're vertical openings connecting the tunnels to the surface. They provide ventilation and smoke extraction in the event of fire and access for the emergency services. And they're also able to manage air quality and temperature in the tunnel. Buildings on the surface, called headhouses, form the entrance to the shafts. They're designed to be sympathetic to their social setting, and they're typically about 25 metres in diameter and usually 1-storey buildings. And on the next slide, we're going to show some current examples. Because we know that the community expressed a lot of concern over the head houses for the vent shafts, and final design for the head houses are quite a way off yet, but we'd like to reassure you that we will continue to work closely with the community as we develop these. And the slide currently on screen shows a head house for HS2 in London, and this is in the South Kilburn area and part of a 4.5 mile long tunnel that runs between Euston and Old Oak Common. So it's a very similar urban makeup as we have in Manchester. And this is an image of another very contrasting head house for the Chiltern Tunnel, this time at Chalfont St Peter. It's hoped that we, as I say, continue to work with local communities in Phase 2B and produce collaborative designs like these that reflect the character of the neighbourhood surrounding the ventilation shaft. From the various events and consultations which we have held during the design process, we've heard concerns expressed by the public about ground settlement. So will the tunnel affect ground stability where you live? About noise and vibration during the tunnelling itself and from trains running in the tunnels after it is built. And concerns generally about property by people who live above the tunnels. So let's have a look at those 3 points in turn. Firstly, ground settlement. And based on past tunnelling experience in the UK, what we can say is that ground movements are predictable, they're controllable, they're too small to affect most structures, and they're steadily reducing in magnitude over the years as drilling technology improves and our early ground investigation works gives us an increasingly accurate picture of the structure of the rock below ground. So our contractors will insert pre-built concrete segments to support the tunnel immediately after excavation and deploy an array of safety control measures to minimise settlement. Buildings and other infrastructure above or in the vicinity of the tunnels and shafts will be closely monitored during construction. And on phase 1, we've entered into agreements with property owners whereby we can record the existing structure of the building and compare the same building after tunnelling work has been completed. These have been made available to anyone within 30 metres of the centre line of a subsurface route, and they provide further protection that any damage caused will be resolved by HS2. If you live above the line of a tunnel, you may be concerned about the levels of noise and vibration. However, the tunnel boring machine will be up to 40 metres below the surface, which is far lower than most tunnels on the London Underground. Even during tunnel, directly below a property, noise or vibration will be short-lived and very limited in nature. Construction noise and vibration effects due to tunnelling work will be avoided through the implementation of the HS2 Construction Code of Practice, which sets out strict operating guidelines for our contractors on reducing all environmental impacts. Operational noise, which is when the trains are running, is being modelled at the moment, and any potential effects will be mitigated, and our mitigation will be set out in our environmental statement. Property, the line of our tunnel is protected from future developments, and any planning applications along the line which involve significant digging below ground will be referred to HS2 by the local planning authority for our consideration. So stress that routine development above ground, house extensions and the like are not a concern. This process is known as subsurface safeguarding. Our safeguarding of the tunnel line will show up in any property conveyance, and the potential buyer will thus be informed about the tunnel before it is built. Some people have expressed concern that prospective buyers will be put off by the prospect of the tunnel and that they may have difficulty selling their properties as a result. But as we've explained before, the engineering evidence is clear that the tunnelling will have no material impact on the properties above it, and a potential buyer should have no logical reason to be deterred from continuing their purpose. taking London as an example again, the deep level tube lines are about 24 metres below the ground. But in some stretches of the central line, for example, this can be as little as 6 metres, just below the utilities depth. The tube trains pass unnoticed from above, and there has been no impact on property values recorded as a result of the underground network. In fact, on the contrary, house prices are significantly boosted as they're near a tube station. But HS2 understands that purchasing decisions are not always based on engineering principles, and concerns, however irrational, can influence the market. But we would expect such fluctuation to be outweighed by the increased demand for property so close to HS2 stations at Piccadilly, Manchester Airport and Crewe. Should say that there's a nominal fee of £50 paid by HS2 to you if you're a freeholder affected by subsurface safeguarding. Look at some of our timescales now, and it often seems as though HS2 has been with us for a long time, but in some ways we're still at the start of the journey to completion here, particularly here in the Northwest. So whilst phase 1 of the scheme, that's the bit from London to Birmingham, is now being built, our section, phase 2B, is still in the outline design stage, and we have not yet submitted a bill to Parliament seeking authority to construct. We'd expect to be able to do this in early 2022 or sooner if possible, and the parliamentary review itself is a lengthy process and can make further changes to the design based on petitions it receives from the public. We would expect royal assent in 2024, and we expect construction to be complete between 2035 and 2040. So that's our overview presentation on tunnelling. And Helen, I'm going to hand over to you now, and hopefully we can have some questions and answers.
Thank you, John. Thank you all for joining us today for today's session, which I hope has given you a bit more of an insight into some of the work we're undertaking and why we're doing it. As John says, we'd like to open the session up for some questions now. Firstly, I'd like to introduce our panel. We have joining us from HS2 Limited, Rob from Engineering, Andy from Tunnelling, Carol from Engagement. From the Department for Transport, we have Peter in the policy team, as well as Tom and Cameron, also from the policy team. As Jonathan mentioned earlier, we'll answer as many questions as possible given the time that we have. So our first question is one for Carol. We received one question which I think was in 2 parts, so we're going to break that up. Please do come back if you have any further follow on from this question. Carol, is the land currently owned by HS2 Limited, including tunnels? So I think that's a safeguarding question.
Yes, as John explained during the presentation, we're not seeking to purchase or acquire land that is above tunnel. Recently, we've gone out with the safeguarding update, and those residents which are above tunnel would have had a subsurface safeguarding letter. And as explained by John during the presentation, this is just a really, should there be any developments which require subsurface works or any, so for example, if it was a large building that would require a lot of structural works or deep piles, then HS2 would be notified that there was planning application for such works, and because we've safeguarded the subsurface rights, we could put an objection in. But for general householders with general buildings or general extensions, there would be no problem for those. And in terms of house purchases, during the surveys associated with purchasing a home, the subsurface safeguarding rights would show up. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you, Carol. And the follow-up part of that question, is there passive provision where speed is the primary objective in future upgrades?
Andy.
Apologies, Andy, that's a question for you. Sorry.
Yep. Yes. So the speed that we designed to a design speed, and the actual operational speed is slightly lower, so that yes, there's passive provision, and also we designed for a GC gauge which is much larger than our actual structural gauge, so there would be a passive provision for future operational requirements to a limited extent. Thank you.
Thank you for that one, Andy. A question now for Rob. Will freight used in construction of Ardwick Tunnel affect the already congested mainline railways towards Piccadilly?
Thanks for that question, and good afternoon, everyone. So we have done some initial work with Network Rail to understand what possessions we may need for the railway, and obviously we'll work with them over the next few years to ensure that we don't disrupt existing rail routes.
Thank you, Rob. A further question for you. Whereabouts on Palatine Road will the shaft and head house be? I can't think of any part of the road that is large enough to accommodate a head house of the area shown. Will something be demolished to accommodate?
So yes, so the current location of the shaft and head house is actually on the existing Withington Golf Course car park, so just to the east side of Palatine Road. The head house itself will be approximately 7 meters high and is approximately the shaft. Well, apologies. It's approximately sort of 34 meters by 10 meters in dimension. And at the site, there's also an auto transformer station as well. And all of this will be accessed from Palatine Road during the operational phase and during construction.
Thank you, Rob. A question now for Tom. Should the tunnel at Ardwick Portal remain underground for the HS2 MPR thoroughfare to the north and beyond following the IRP review, would you consider preparing this change earlier?
Hello, good afternoon. As you say, the IRP is still to report back and it's looking at a number of these questions. I think we wouldn't want to preempt any decisions ahead of that reporting.
Thank you for that, Tom. We have a further question. The next couple are for you, Rob. What is the stated tunnel depth measured from? The centre of the tunnels or from the closest points to the tunnel, of the tunnel to the ground?
So I think it depends on exactly what document you're reading. So there will be two tunnel depths that are presented, which will be the tunnel depth to the crown of the tunnel, which is the top of the tunnel, and then there's also a tunnel. There's also a depth from the ground level to the rail level itself. From a land and property and safeguarding perspective, which is maybe the reason for the question, that would be to the crown of the tunnel.
Thank you, Rob. And a further question here around the route of the disposal. So what route will the disposal lorries take from the Thorley Lane end of the tunnel to junction 7 of the M56? So
thanks for that question. So the tunnel boring machine does go from the southern portal up to the second venture from Palatine Road, which I discussed a few minutes ago. And the route that the spoil will take, the lorries will take, will be via Runga Lane and then onto the M56. Nothing will go down Brooks Lane. It will all go to the south or to the southeast down Runga Lane directly onto the M56.
Thank you for that, Rob. I've got a question here for Andy. If after the tunnel is built and the high-speed trains are running, there is vibration above, what then? Can there be remediation? There's also a comment on the compensation for property value loss at that point. Andy, I suspect you might not be able to answer that question. I'll see if anybody else from the panel is available.
Yeah, so regarding the first part of that question, the risk of vibration is very low. We've already mentioned the sorts of depths we're dealing with here, and so that risk is low, and we further mitigate any minor vibration that you'd normally see on another type of railway, which would be using it. We use a track slab, and also the design of the track foundation, if you like, would be a resilient material to reduce vibration to even further amounts. So we have very strict requirements for reducing this as much as possible. But even so, with the depths we're looking at, that would not occur.
Thank you, Andy. A question again for Rob. There's a pumping station indicated at the Thorley Lane end of the tunnel. What is its purpose and where is it pumping to?
So the tunnel drainage, apologies, the pumping station is required for railway drainage. So it's a result of obviously getting water away from the railway and within the tunnel. I haven't got the detail to hand about where it'll be pumping to, but I'm happy to take that question away if the person can leave their details, and we'll get back to them on that.
Thank you, Rob. The next question is one for Carol. At what point will the head house designs be drafted?
We would look to work with the local community and local stakeholders to draft design after we have received royal assent. So based on our timelines, that would be post 2024.
Thank you, Carol. A question now for Rob. You mentioned the conveyor belt to remove waste from the north of the Crewe Tunnel. Will this cover the south entrance to Crewe Tunnel too, or will that need waste? Will that waste need HGVs or road removal?
So the tunnel is bored from north to south using 2 TBM. So all the tunnel spoil waste, which we approximate will be around 960,000 meters cubed, will be conveyed back up to the north side of the tunnel. Approximately 700,000 cubic meters of this material will actually be transferred into borrow pits to replace the material that we take out to use on the embankments for the route. And approximately 260,000 cubic meters of this material will leave by rail from construction sidings we put on that are directly connecting to the West Coast Main Line, and they will be just south of Winsford, around the Crewe depot area. There obviously will be some movements from the south of Crewe Tunnel with regards to other construction activities there. So, for example, the Southern Portal is obviously being built there, and there will be some limited HGV movements to effectively build that portal and any other activities that need to happen there.
Thank you, Rob. Carol, can you comment on the fate of the shops in the Birchfields Road Retail Park, apologies, where the shaft is scheduled to be constructed? There are shops and a GP's practice on either side of the car park where the shaft is planned to emerge. Are the shops going to be relocated, and if so, where?
Hi, thanks, Helen. We recognise the impacts on Fallowfield Retail Park. We anticipate that the medical centre will be able to continue to operate during the construction period, but as you explained in your question, we have identified that there would be 3 retail units that would need to be demolished, and presently engagement continues with the retail park owners and the operators who are within the retail units, and I guess it's quite early in the design to say exactly what's going to happen to those retail units, but we will continue to engage with them and try and support them. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Carol. Rob, do you have the data for the length of tunnel track for acceleration and deceleration for the Manchester Tunnel? What is the design load mass for each tunnel for heavier trains?
I don't have, that's a good question. I don't have the data to hand to provide on this call, so again, happy to provide that after. There obviously will be acceleration and deceleration to the two stations. And again, apologies, I don't have access to the lengths of that on this call at the moment, so that's something we can provide at a later date.
Thank you for that. Andy, I live directly above the proposed line in Didsbury. Am I like to hear the tunnelling or the trains passing through the tunnel?
Yes, so this is even less of an issue to the vibration part. So the noise should not be an issue at the depths, but again, we have to assess this to very tight requirements that we have, and in due course, closer as the project gets developed and designed, details will be provided.
Thank you. Question for Rob. How long are the tunnelling operations with Manchester Tunnel planned to take?
Thanks for that question. The actual overall period we've got is broken down by compounds, and the southern portal for Manchester Tunnel is actually in operation for 9 years, and the shafts and the northern portal, sorry, for 9 years as well. So the tunnelling will take less time than that, because obviously some of that work is for rail systems and the rail systems fit out. And the 4 shafts are there for 6 years approximately, between 5 and 6 years. Andy, do you want to add anything about the boring times, or do you think I've covered it?
So the boring, yeah. So boring times for the tunnelling are relatively quick. We sometimes work on a 15 meters per day, so we're within a few days. The TBM passes.
Thank you for that, both of you. Andy, a question for you. How similar are the ground/soil/rock conditions for those tunnels, for these tunnels, to those which have been previously completed with similar construction methods?
So similar construction methods, I assume, we're talking the London clay. Obviously, the majority of tunnelling has happened in London over the last few years. So in the shallower regions towards the entrance and exit portals, we could be looking at similar firm clays, which comes in with the Mercia mudstone strata. But as we get deeper, we're looking into more of a sandstone, which is a soft rock. So these come under the Sherwood sandstone regions, so a lot more competent and should have a lot less of an effect settlement wise, but again, this needs to be assessed closer to the time to see what those effects are. Obviously, we have the standard process that we follow to assess those settlement predictions.
Thank you, Andy. We've got a number of engineering questions coming up for Rob here. The first one, Rob, the tunnel exit in Crewe on Broughton Road is shown to have moved back in the new redesign. Is the new exit by the compound you have on that road?
Yes, so in terms of construction traffic, all the traffic will exit onto Broughton Road and make its way through Crewe back onto the SRN, so the Strategic Road Network. Thank you.
And the next question for you, Rob, how much works materials will be brought on off-site by rail, preferably as much by rail as possible?
Yes, so as I mentioned previously, all the spoil from Crewe Tunnel will either go back into borrow pits through use of the conveyor, or will go around go out by rail. Sorry, and it's 260,000 meters cubed that go out by rail from Crewe Tunnel. From Manchester Tunnel, obviously the southern portal is not near an existing rail link, so currently there's approximately 510,000 meters cubed of spoil which need to go out by road, but we're right next to the strategic road network there, the M56, so hopefully there won't be too much impact on too many receptors. And from the north of the tunnel, all of the spoil is going out by rail, and that equates to around 930 meters cubed of material. 930,000, sorry, to clarify, meters cubed of material.
Thank you, Rob. Rob, one further question for you. What is the approximate size of the head house to be built at Wilmslow Road?
Okay, yes, the head house at Wilmslow Road is predicted to be around 8 meters high, and the diameter of it is around 30 by 30, so 30 meters by 30 meters. Thank you.
A couple of questions now for Andy. Andy, what is the design load mass for each tunnel for heavier trains?
We don't have that figure to hand, but be more than willing to try and provide that. But a lot of these details come out as we get further into the design. So we will have it for phase 1, and we could provide maybe something similar.
Thank you. And a second question for you, Andy. Will the boring machines need abnormal load / exceptional convoy status due to their size? And if so, have the routes been established to get to the site?
So certainly for the TBM, we break it down to as many pieces as possible, and some of those are highly likely to become abnormal loads, but not all of them, because the backup, etc., can be dismantled to a smaller amount. And this, I'm not the logistics person, but I believe they follow the same routes as any other agreed routes.
Thank you, Andy. Back to Rob now for a question. How will the soil be removed from the Ardwick side of the tunnel by road, rail or canal? How long will the tunnelling take for the Ardwick to Davenport stretch?
Thanks for that question. So as just previously mentioned, all the spoil from the southern drive, so from the North Portal down to the Palatine Road vent shaft, will all be removed by rail from Ardwick. Obviously, again, there will be materials which come on to site by road for construction of the portal and other things that are happening in that area. Apologies, Helen, what was the second part of the question?
The second part of the question is an excellent one, because I appear to have
was the length
now.
of tunnel drive, wasn't it? Yeah, apologies. I don't have those figures to hand, but I believe, as I said, because the compounds are in access for around 6 years around Wilmslow Road, I presume it will be around that period, but we can get the exact numbers back to them.
Thank you very much. Apologies on for that question, and I hadn't got the second part to it. Apologies for that. A further question, Rob, would the HS2 approach to Piccadilly Station conflict directly with the Eastlands Freight branch, including the disused Ardwick Viaduct?
So we've obviously taken all the existing infrastructure into account when constructing the route. And I don't believe there's a direct impact. I believe the viaducts will be going over the top. Apologies, I don't have those direct details to hand again, but again, that's another question we can take away and potentially answer in the NA08 session later in the week.
Thank you, Rob. A question for Andy now. Got a couple for you. Will you be working 24 hours on the tunnelling?
Yes, normally, yes, the tunnelling will be 24 hours a day. apart from a stop for Christmas and some bank holidays.
Thank you for that. A further question for you, Andy. What is the extent of the above ground disruption when digging the shafts and building the head houses?
So obviously we need to dig the shaft. That would be dependent on the method of construction. It could be a diaphragm wall, so elements of concreting, excavation of the shaft, and then pretty much after that stage it's not too dissimilar to any other building construction works, i.e. the shaft fit out will be concrete walls, so no dissimilar to a building being constructed, and then the single story building again on top of that.
Thank you, Andy. Question back to you, Rob. Would the HS2 approach, nope, I think we've already covered that, my apologies. The tunnel depths for Manchester Tunnel near Palatine Road are provided in earlier documents when the route was slightly different. Now the route has changed. Are tunnel depths near Palatine going to be the same?
Thanks for that. I don't have the earlier figures, but I can confirm the depth around Palatine Road from the ground to rail levels around 30 metres, and then the depth from ground level to the crown of the tunnel itself would be about 21 metres.
Thank you. Andy, will we hear a backdraft when trains are entering and leaving the tunnel?
So the term backdraft is not what we normally, but this is indicating the micro pressure wave issue of the train entering the tunnel, almost like a piston effect. And as we've mentioned before, we provide a porous portal at both ends of the tunnel, which help with reducing any noise or pressure wave sounds from these tunnels. And again, at the shafts, there wouldn't be anything because the shafts are not vented. They're only there for mainly for access for maintenance, or for in the event of a emergency for the fire brigade to access the tunnels, and obviously ventilation in that scenario. So most majority of the time for the shaft areas there'll be nothing.
Thank you. Rob, what will happen to the spoil and what will it be used for?
Thanks for that. So as previously mentioned, a large majority of the spoil from Crewe Tunnel will actually be used to restore borrow pits. So we've got 3 borrow pits next to the trace to the north of Crewe Tunnel, and these are effectively used for engineering work. So the materials of good quality, and we'll use that material within the embankments within the MEO2 region between Crewe Tunnel and Lockstock Grelham. And the rest of the spoil, given it's quite wet and not appropriate to use for embankments and for high-speed trains, will be transferred to tip. And from Manchester Tunnel itself, again, because the majority of the material is quite poor, we'll be disposing it to tip. But there's also the opportunity to use it in some landscape mitigation earthworks, which don't have any engineering form.
Thank you for that. A question now for Andy. I live 400 metres from the tunnel. Will I be affected at this distance by noise, house settlement, or subsidence, both during both tunnel boring and also when the trains are running on completion? Secondary question, will house prices be expected to fall at this distance?
Certainly not any effect at that distance. I think the most simplest way to think about it is if you take the tunnels are about 30 to 35, 40 metres deep in various locations. So if you was to take a 45-degree line from that tunnel depth up, you're looking to the 35 metres either side of the tunnels as a very rough guide. So 400 meters is like over 8 times more than that. So there'll be no effect at all.
Thank you, Andy. A couple of questions now for Rob. What are the plans for all of the traffic on Broughton Road as we're struggling with this issue now?
Thanks for that question. Yes, we're aware, I mean, in any urban location actually where we're putting vent shafts and where we have compounds, there is a necessity on us to do a transport assessment, so to do traffic modelling along the route. And that's something we're currently completing at the moment. And any upgrades or any mitigation that would be required to roads or junctions to facilitate construction would be reported within the hybrid build design and within the ES. Currently, we believe the traffic levels on Broughton Road do allow for our construction traffic to use that without any major improvements.
Thank you. Follow-up question, how long will it take to start and finish the Crewe tunnel?
So again, thanks for that question. So the North Portal compound, which is the main compound for Crewe Tunnel itself, is there for 7 years. So it's there from, I guess, the tunnel boring machine setup, which takes quite a while to do in itself. And then it's through to the end of the tunnel boring process and also the final construction around the North Portal itself. So around 7 years in total will be on site.
Thank you. Another question for you, Rob. Will the tunnelling be concurrent with the construction of the airport station and the new gyratory road system at Hale Barnes?
Yes. So obviously tunnelling is one of the longest activities we've had because of the relatively slow movement of TBMs compared to some of the other infrastructure built on the route. So there will definitely be overlaps between the tunnel boring and the other items discussed, so airport station construction and Hale Barnes. The southern compound at Manchester Station and the build for the airport itself is there for 9 years, which allows us to obviously complete the tunnel boring and all the tunnel infrastructure as well as building the airport station.
Thank you. I'm just going to take a brief pause whilst we review the questions coming in, and if there are any further questions, please do add those to the Q&A section. We've got a few minutes left of the webinar. Rob, question for you. Will the Manchester Tunnel be able to support additional track interface? Would HS2 approach to Piccadilly Station conflict directly with the Eastland Freight Branch, including the disused Ardwick Viaduct?
Apologies, I did state previously if this is the same question that we just have to get back to them on the exact
my apologies.
Infrastructure, and I'm not really sure what the first part of the question means in terms of the additional track interface. If someone wants to just add to that and give a bit more detail, we'll try to answer it today.
Thank you. Sorry, apologies for that, Rob. And we do have a further question though. Will the Manchester Tunnel be able to support additional track interface?
So I think, yeah, on that one, if they could provide a bit more detail, because I'm not quite sure what the question's asking. Okay, we shall give people a moment. However, we can always follow up with answers to questions after this webinar. So there's no need to rush that in. So a follow-up question now for Andy. I'm still not clear as to whether if one's house is immediately above the tunnel, if there will be construction noise, vibration and trains, so I assume operational noise and vibration.
Yeah, so the only is the more construction noise, which is a very short-term that could be perceived is the word. So that would be only over a few days. More details are given in a fact sheet for tunnels that should be read, that can give a little bit more background on that. But it is minimal. It's perceived, and it needs to be looked at in different environments, because obviously, as you can bear in mind, different ground conditions will take the vibrations different ways. It depends on the exact depth. Over 20 to 30 meters, a very low perception is envisaged. But if you're near the portals, then that might be a little bit higher. But again, there's lots of varying factors and environmental considerations that need to be taken into account to understand the perception level that's possible.
Thank you for that, Andy. A question for Rob. How much traffic is expected to need to access the Wilmslow Road vent shaft site, and are there any implications for the surrounding roads?
So the exact traffic numbers will be reported in the environmental assessment due at the end of next year, early 2022. I think the number of vehicles using any road, similar to what we just discussed on Crewe, we'll be undertaking traffic modelling for, and obviously if any improvements need to be made, then we'll do that. Given it's only vent shaft construction here rather than any large earthworks moving to and from the site, although there will be earthworks associated with the shaft itself, we expect the vehicle numbers to be relatively low and can be incorporated within the capacity that's existing currently.
Thank you. We've got a couple more questions now for Andy. Andy, what measures will or can be taken to avoid wildlife entering tunnels, particularly birds and bats?
So I'm not actually an environmentalist. We do have a department for that, but just to give a little bit of background is that any bat routes are assessed and checked upon. There is not a history of bats flying into tunnels being an issue, but if they were to cross the path, then as on phase 1, we have a bat structure which is to protect the crossing of the bats across the railway network, and that's to ensure that they don't fly across the actual route. But again, this is assessed in the detailed design stage to assess if there's any impact. But again, the security of the we have high security levels for the portals, and because of the equipment that's there, so hopefully that will help towards any wildlife entering tunnels.
Thank you. Carol, did you have anything further on that question?
I did. I just had something further in response to when Andy was talking about the perception of the tunnel vibration, because I note a few residents were concerned about what the impacts would be for them during construction. And whilst Andy's given a great engineering answer and perspective, I'll just explain that HS2 is committed to being a good neighbour, and as part of that commitment, when construction is ongoing, we would, so for example, when the tunnel boring machine is scheduled to be boring underneath your house, we would be giving you letters notifying you. There would be a community engagement team that would be keeping in contact with the neighbourhoods that are impacted by the tunnel boring machine. So an example which we've had from Crossrail, from colleagues who work in the community engagement team there, where letters were sent out and communities were notified that the tunnel boring machine was due to travel under their homes. We've been given feedback about how a few weeks later, the residents in question were chasing up the help desk to find out the exact date, and the TBMs had travelled under their homes and they didn't notice it at all. So I guess I'm just trying to explain how it works in terms of the community engagement team keeping neighbourhoods and residents impacted up to date about the works that will be going on when we are constructing the tunnel.
Thank you, Carol. We are down to our last 2 questions now that we've got time for, and both of them are for Andy. Andy, are the tunnel boring machines bespoke for each tunnel, or are they generic machines?
So the bit of both really, the backup, etc. They all have pretty much the standard backup. They all have a control cabin and the equipment that's required. But they're also bespoke because it depends on the ground conditions that they go through. So it depends on the choice of machine. There's 3 main types: a earth pressure balance machine, or a slurry machine, or which we're using in area north of phase 1, which is a variable density machine, which is almost a crossover between both those types. And also the head is very bespoke, the cutter head, because that needs to be designed for those exact ground conditions that we envisage to go through. So yeah, so it's a bit of both really.
Thank you. And our final question. You mentioned portal noise. Is this expected to be 24-hour day during construction, and how far will the noise travel?
So that needs assessment again, and I'm sure there's a lot of assessment work that will be going out now or towards the hybrid build stage. And but essentially, once the tunnel is within 100 meters driven within the tunnel, all you're getting from the site area is the locos that are coming in and out to take in the materials. So it'll be a varying change in impact, but again, we can provide more details.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your questions, and thank you to the panel. I'll hand back over to Jonathan now.
Thank you, participants, for your questions today, and can I also thank the panel for their detailed answers. You can find out more information about everything you've heard from our webinar today on our website. And if you have any questions or need help accessing the information, please contact our help desk on 08081 434 434, by Minicom on 08081 456 472, or by email hs2inquiries@hs2.org.uk. Or you can visit our website at www.hs2.org.uk/phase 2B. Thank you for attending today's webinar and have a good day.